Welcome back to Unlapped. Laurence Edmondson here. My other two hosts, Katie George and Nate Saunders, sadly cannot be with us, but we have Spencer Hall joining us instead. Spencer, how's it going?
Yeah, going well. I hope you enjoyed your extended trip to Japan. I feel so bad for your F1 guys who are like, oh, we can't go home. I guess we'll have to just spend 2 or 3 weeks in Japan.
It's been tough, I have to admit. I am now paying the price because I got back to the UK last night. I couldn't tell you what time of day it is. So, Spencer, I'm going to be leaning on you a lot to get me through this podcast and help me out when I forget stuff. But I tell you what, I mean, what a country to have to spend some extra time in. And the reason we do that, just to make it clear to, part of it is because we are taking a bit of holiday out there, but also the idea of going from Australia, being on a time zone 13 hours or so out from where we usually are, back to the UK and then back out to Japan is pretty terrifying, to say at least, from a body clock point of view. So we took the opportunity, and yeah, man, what a country, and still one of my favorite races to go to, because like people say it all the time, and I guess if you haven't been out there, it might sound like a bit of cliche, but the fans there, the circuit there's nowhere else like it in the world.
Yeah, this is something that anyone listening to this, I think, might need to hear. People love this race. And not just in terms of viewership, they like going to it. People who go to Suzuka come back with it with like nearly universal reviews, love the track, love the layout, love the people, love the way it's run. It's just a superb race by all accounts. Yes.
It absolutely is. And it comes down to little details. So I was walking around the fan park, and you can't help but get kind of drawn into the merchandise stalls and the stuff they have in there. So they have food that's made to look like bits of, say, bits of rubber that come off the tires, marbles as we call them in Formula One, but it's actually dried squid. They have asphalt rusks, so rusk that's made dark to look like a chunk of asphalt, and salt and pepper gravel as well. Just all these kind of little things where you're just like, nowhere else but Japan would do this. And it's a real love of the sport that comes through, both from the people organizing that race and especially the people attending it. So if you are into F1, I'm guessing you are if you're listening to this podcast, please set aside some money, some travel budget, sometime in the future to go to Japan, to go to Suzuka to see that race. I think it's just signed another 5-year contract, so there's a little bit of time to play with, but there's been some talk for some time now that Osaka could come in as a potential replacement. So yeah, I'm telling you, get booked in. Okay, right. I've got a bit of housekeeping to do before we go any further with this. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, like this video, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to ESPN for more F1 content. If you're listening, hit us with a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let's get into it. Okay, Spencer, we just talked about how great Suzuka is, but on track, it was more of the same pretty much. Max Verstappen, 3 wins from 4. The only one he missed out on was due to that brake failure in Australia. We could go into whether or not he would have won that or not, but I feel like that was another podcast that's been and gone. Now, after he dominated in Suzuka, team boss Toto Wolff, remember, the guy who was one of Max Verstappen's biggest rivals through 2021, turned around and after just 4 races said, and I quote, "No one is going to catch Max this year. His driving and the car are just spectacular. You can see the way he manages the tires. And basically this season is now about who can be best of the rest." End quote. I don't know where we go from there, because we've still got 20 races to fill, but is Toto right? Is this Max Verstappen's season already? Should we, I don't know, like, what should we do about this championship where it looks like Max Verstappen really is just going to dominate for another year?
I mean, if the upgrades include an actual mounted rocket pack on the back of the McLaren or the back of the Ferrari, then maybe we're talking about a different story. I don't think that's what we're talking about here. I think he's right. Now, he might not be right in terms of the total domination we saw last year, because yes, we already have had a brake failure on the Red Bull. We have had different tracks where cars are going to be more competitive against the Red Bull, right? We have seen, this is something you can hear the announcers talking about during the races. And I think some of it's optimism, and I think foolish optimism at that, when they go, well, the gap is closed between them and Ferrari by seconds. And you go, yeah, so it's down from 18 to 14. That's still 14 seconds. That's how much better they are. It's a sport that I would remind everybody, the changes are glacial, right? And glacial changes happen very slowly until they don't, right? Until something shears off and happens all at once. These are big teams. We're talking about Japan. The scale of the sport, again, we move people across continents, we move them across multiple time zones, and then you have to build an entirely different car involving these hundreds of engineers and, you know, thousands of people all working at once. Changes happen slowly on the macro scale. Okay. And then sometimes when momentum gets, they break all at once. Like, I think one of those breaks we saw was Lewis Hamilton switching to Ferrari. That is one of these things where things build up over a long, long time, and all of a sudden there's a calving and you see something happen all at once. This is my long-winded way of saying that if we're going to see changes at Red Bull and in their level of dominance, I think it's going to be very, very slow. It'll happen gradually, and then all at once it will become very apparent. That time is not 2024. It just does not feel like that. So we're doing a lot of what we're going to have to do and what we did last year, which is you find drama in the 2 to 20, right? And there's plenty of that. There's plenty of drama in the 2 to 20 and in the 3 to 20 if Checo Perez continues his stellar year, because it may be worse in some respects than last year in terms of monotony, because Checo's been really, really good. We don't even have the sort of drama of last year of Checo being real good and then, you know, vacillating between mediocre and spotty and then going back to being good. We don't even have that so far. So hope for more brake failures. That's all I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting that point you made. It's so true. It does take time for things to change in Formula One. And I think people are right to say that Ferrari have made progress. If you looked at the gap at the Japanese Grand Prix just 6 months ago, they were about 40 seconds off Max. This year it was 20 seconds. Now, I'm not going to turn around and try and kid anyone that means that they're about to start racing for victories, because it doesn't mean that. But it does indicate progress in the right direction. The problem is that, yeah, Red Bull aren't stopping. If you look at the one car that actually received probably the most obvious update during the Japanese Grand Prix, it was the Red Bull. And it was stuff, not that they had learned from mistakes or, you know, it wasn't trying to correct something that was wrong from the first few races. This was just ideas they had before the start of the season that just took a little bit of time to be manufactured and put on the car, knowing full well that they were going to result in extra performance. So, yeah, I'm not going to try and kid anyone and say that you know, Ferrari are about to turn around and start challenging Red Bull at every race, but I think there are signs that they are moving in the right direction to some extent. But then let's pick up on the other thing you said there. Checo Perez, could he mount a serious challenge? You know, even as I say that, I'm not convinced of myself.
We're back on it. We tried this last year. But
we have to ask, or are we seeing at least at the very least, a slightly different Checo this year, where we won't see him bounce between those high highs and those very low lows? Do you think there's enough from these first 4 races to draw any conclusions about the kind of Checo Perez we're going to see throughout the season?
Given the data that we have on Checo, it seems to be a more consistent and comfortable Checo, and which seems wild to me, because if you want a glimpse of hope for everyone else, it's that Red Bull's politics and Red Bull's internal politics were a disaster over the offseason, to say the least. A team that was scandal-ridden, and if you wanted a rumor, you could pick one up off the floor about who was in charge and who was siding with whom. Ultimately, given the machine that they've created, it hasn't mattered in the 2024 season. It will matter down the road. I think this is the weirdest thing to say about F1, given the vast technical challenges and the element of the sport that involves machines. It's a people sport. It really is a people sport when it comes down to it. And the people side of Red Bull right now is in crisis. It's an ongoing crisis, right? People go, well, did you forget about that? No, they all still have to come to work. They all still have to pretend, if not to like each other, then to love what they do and get the job done, which they do. Okay, they're paid a lot of money to do it, and they're very professional about it. But that side of Red Bull, that's worth watching. Somehow, paradoxically, in the middle of all of this, Checo Perez seems tranquil. He seems happier than ever. Maybe the pressure's off of him. Maybe politically, because of his contract situation and because of the way Max is so firmly attached to one side in this like Red Bull schism, that maybe the pressure's completely off him, and maybe he races best like that.
Well, I think there could be something to that. And yeah, if we talk about the politics within Red Bull, it seems increasingly that Christian Horner, who we know has been under a huge amount of pressure since the start of this year, I think continues to be within that team, has kind of linked himself a little bit to Perez, and kind of in previous years, you know, we seen him put the pressure on, and now he's talking about Perez in slightly different terms. So again, I'll give you a quote from the weekend. Christian Horner said, I quote, "I think his confidence is high. He's very focused on the job at hand, and he's comfortable in the team." and he knows he's out of contract for next year. It's his seat to lose. He's very popular in the team, and he started the season in the best possible way. He just needs to keep doing what he's doing. End of quote. Now, that sounds like very much suggesting that it's in Perez's hands what happens. That's not the impression we were getting coming through the winter, was it? We had podcasts at the start of this year where we were talking about, right, we're kind of assuming Perez is out the door at the end of this year. Who's going to replace him? And then there are a number of brilliant options out there, continue to be, apart from Lewis Hamilton, who's gone to Ferrari already, we know for next year. Pretty much all the other drivers who are out of contract are open to the possibility of anywhere. And you would think that Red Bull would be a very popular team to join. So do you think Perez is actually in a serious situation now, where if he continues to do what he's doing, which is finish second to Max, don't rock the boat, just get the results out there, do you think he can guarantee himself a place at Red Bull next year?
It would be the funniest outcome to me if the team known for discarding drivers, and Red Bull is not exactly the most patient when it comes to anybody but Max Verstappen, correct? And not that they had to be that patient with Max Verstappen, okay, who was good almost immediately and brilliant shortly thereafter. It would be the funniest outcome to me if they chose Checo Perez and kept him on board simply for the stability, because we've seen this. Checo Perez as a number 2 driver, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Somebody who helped them win a title, like played an obvious and important role in defending and keeping pressure off of Max Verstappen at times during his first championship. A guy who I think by personality, you don't see him out there with a podcast. You don't see him out there overly bucking for a one spot. He doesn't chirp to the media a whole lot in English or in Spanish. It just simply doesn't happen. He's a great pick for a number 2 driver, always has been, and would be for the next year. That would be the most ironic outcome to me if Red Bull, this team that thrives on, strife and internal competition and at times, open warfare against each other in the press, if they manage to just go ahead and keep the team together. That would be the weirdest, funniest, and not unlikely outcome.
Well, I think if they're looking to continue this success, certainly into 2025, I think 2026, slightly different situation because of the change in regulations, but into 2025, their best bet is actually, to steady everything. Just kind of make sure Max doesn't leave, which I think is looking increasingly likely. Make sure that Jos Verstappen isn't throwing bombs into the press every couple of weeks to try and destabilize everything. Obviously, make sure Adrian Newey sees out his contract and is a happy person within that design team. And then, all of those things will pretty much guarantee success down the line. But it's interesting that we're now talking about Perez in that position. I guess the other side to look at it is if you're a Carlos Sainz or, even a Fernando Alonso, also out of contract at the end of this year, when you look at Red Bull, would you be tempted to go there? Or is the fact that you'll be going up against Max Verstappen in a team that has this underlying friction going on, do you want to be a part of that? Or do you want to try and be part of a team that maybe in 2026 is going to have the opportunity to challenge that team?
That's the big question. Do you pick the right horse for 26 and the regulations change? And to me, just based on past performance, betting against Red Bull to miss that, it seems unlikely. It just doesn't, they'll at least be competitive. I don't think they'll have the dominant machine that they have right now. If they do, that would be spectacular for Red Bull fans. I think they will still be outrageously competitive at worst, just because of the brain power they have behind that team. However, if you are the enterprising sort and you do think, hey, maybe Verstappen continues to be unhappy, maybe he ends up leaving. If that happens, and that is a wild bet to make, but if you do, there's the throne. It's unclaimed. It's right there. You might want to go ahead and take a chance. And you'd say, well, who has the confidence to do that? My answer is an F1 driver, somebody who believes that they are the number 1. There are 20 guys out there who all believe they're the best driver in the world. All of them. And they all believe they could do it if they just had the right team. That is the number 1 suspect for the right team in almost any context to me.
Yeah, that is very true. I mean, having spent some time around Formula 1 drivers over the last decade or so, you do often see that confidence deep down below, which makes them think, I could go into Max's team and challenge him. And then if they can't do it, it's often they're looking for reasons why. It's like, well, it was Max's team in the first place, or, the engineering setup isn't designed to have two cars going winning races. So yeah, you do see that a lot. And it'll be fascinating to see who starts to make moves within this driver market. I mean, there's the one person who does seem very keen to get something sorted early on, because a lot of people are happy to just wait, see how things develop. But the one person who does seem keen is Carlos Sainz, currently on the form of his life, I would suggest. I mean, obviously there was the win in Australia, but the podium in Japan as well, all coming off the back of his appendicitis in Saudi Arabia. If you're in Carlos Sainz's shoes, and this is a tricky one, and I know it's a tricky one because the management is taking their time deliberating over the options, but where would you pick? Because you've got potentially Red Bull. I mean, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that he goes and replaces Perez there if Max stays on and goes up against Max. You've got Mercedes. Mercedes have never been so keen on Sainz, but he might be able to put together a good argument. You've got the Sauber team due to become Audi, if we talk about teams that are about to raise up. And then also potentially Aston Martin, if Fernando either decides to move teams or decides that he's done with F1. He claims he hasn't made a decision on any of that yet, but also another possibility as a seat to go into. So if you're Carlos Sainz or you're Carlos Sainz's manager, where are you looking?
There's an interesting thing for me long-term with Red Bull that I think I want to address first, which is this, that are we going to be looking at the same organization in terms of intensity and in terms of direction, with an aging Helmut Marko and no Dietrich Mateschitz around? Okay, Dietrich Mateschitz, who has passed away last year. Without that, are we looking at the exact same organization? You have to think real long-term if you're doing this. You have to think 3 to 4 years down the road. I can't see fielding the exact same attitude as an organization without him. I know he was hands-off. He was not in the building, so to speak, but that's a guy who had the kind of guiding vision for the team. If I am a wild card optimist, okay, and who's to say that the smooth operator is not? If Carlos Sainz is looking to the team that has the most blue sky wild potential, why not Audi? Like, why not that Audi team? Why not you? Like, why not be the person who takes them from the ground floor to the penthouse? That would be, if I had all of the confidence in the world, which again, we've discussed, F1 drivers are not short on that. Why not do that? That seems to me, if you had the most, entrepreneurs call it the blue water phase, right? Okay. If you want some blue water, that's the place to go. Okay. As for Mercedes feels like a safer choice, right? That feels like, obviously, like, okay, this is going to be a team that's going to be very competitive in 2026. They probably won't miss as badly as they missed on the last phase of F1 development. So that feels like the safer one. But now I've talked myself into Audi. I'm like, wait, go ahead and try that. Okay. Because obviously Red Bull seems like guaranteed short-term success. The more fascinating long-term pick to me would be Audi.
Yeah. And I think from what I've heard, that's kind of the way that they're looking. And on hopefully, I think what he's keen for as well is a long-term contract, because the one thing that Sainz had to deal with a lot early in his career was moving from team to team to team. He went from Toro Rosso to Renault, and then to McLaren, and then McLaren to Ferrari. And now obviously he's no longer going to be staying at Ferrari beyond this. And I think the times that he's really benefited is the times where he's had, a good, stable run, a single team. And I think if he can see himself getting a nice long-term contract with the Audi team, I don't think anyone's kidding themselves that chassis and kind of, team operational side at the moment that Sauber has is not good enough. You just have to look at the problems they've had with pit stops this year.
Right.
In Japan, potentially Valtteri Bottas was in with a shot of points, but the pit stops just aren't up to scratch. And then occasionally they have these ridiculously long pit stops because they literally have an issue with the wheel nuts that they haven't yet been able to solve. Stuff like that would really concern me. But yeah, I think long term, you're right. With the might of Audi coming in, the early commitment they've made compared to what they originally planned to do, and the fact that the Sainz's via Carlos Sainz Sr., legendary rally driver, currently still racing in the Dakar from time to time, linked in with Audi. They know the people at the very top, and they know what to expect. So it does sound like, if I was going to bet on where he ends up, I would put money that way. It's not decided by any means, but it looks like there's an inclination towards that.
Yeah, in short, there's two ways to gauge your value. There's your absolute value, which is to any team, but then there is your individual value in context to a team. Your success is going to be much more likely at a place like Red Bull and Mercedes, but what you mean to a team like Audi, which is basically going to be doing a startup, no, like your value will not be higher than anywhere other than a startup if you're somebody like Carlos Sainz. It's fascinating to me how they make these decisions and how they come about it, because you approach one thing and go, well, it's obviously Red Bull, and then after 5 minutes of talking about it, you go, why would you not do Audi? Like, why?
Yeah.
Like, it seems patently obvious after 5 minutes of thinking about it.
So yeah, something that we'll definitely be keeping an eye on going into the next few races, and I think hopefully something we'll have some more concrete answers on fairly soon. Let's go back to the Japanese Grand Prix just quickly and look at the battle behind Red Bull. We talked a little bit about the progress Ferrari had made. Were you a bit disappointed with McLaren? Because again, if we go back to this race, which was only 6 months ago, because it used to be in an October date, now it's in this April date, and McLaren were easily second best at the Japanese Grand Prix in 2023 and much closer to Red Bull, thanks to this just, immense amount of performance they had in high-speed corners. But this year, certainly in the race, that performance wasn't there. Norris found it in qualifying, but not in the race. So are you a little bit concerned about maybe McLaren not making the progress they need?
Not for the first half of the season, because I think they're a second half team. And I only say that based on the way that their process, the way that they've done things in the past, which is they will work this out on the fly. They feel like one of the most will work it out on the fly teams in the best sense of the term. So I'm not overly worried about it. I was a little disappointed that you couldn't see Piastri defend his place a little bit better in this race. I was disappointed that you didn't see Norris translate the pace from qualifying over into the race. Those are my two disappointments there. But overall, in terms of where McLaren's at, I don't know if it's time to sound any alarm bells. I think that, especially given who's around them at that time, like Norris, who are you behind? You're behind Ferrari and Red Bull. That's expected, right? Like, I think like that's probably where you should be. Seeing an Aston and a Mercedes up there, though, that's the part that might make you a little bit bitter. Might go, okay, we probably could have picked up a spot or two, but realistically, I think this is about where they're at. The progress is still to come for them, I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Certainly, if you were to make the comparison over a 12-month period rather than 6 months, then McLaren's still looking incredibly rosy. Less so for Mercedes. And I mean, it does seem now that we have this Red Bull Ferrari top two pretty much in place. Red Bull clearly further ahead than Ferrari, but that seems to be the two teams occupying the podium at most races unless something goes wrong. And then we do have this bunch, I would say, currently led by McLaren with Aston Martin and Mercedes. You talk about McLaren being a second half team. What do you see from Aston Martin and Mercedes? Because two very good teams as well, well-resourced teams, certainly. How do you see that battle panning out? Because just 36 points separating those teams at the moment.
Yeah, why are these just not considered the same team at this point? Like, that's really, in terms of profile, really the only thing that differentiates them is that the driving duo on the Mercedes side is clearly superior in terms of consistency and performance. That's about it. Otherwise, these feel like the same team. It feels like they're going for the same spots. It feels like Mercedes are we just gonna rerun last year? Like that feels like what we're gonna do. We're just gonna rerun Mercedes last year and completely punt to next year and beyond. Because I thought, well, maybe we'll get in the off season. We'll completely nope. This feels a lot like 2023 for Mercedes. Does it not? Is that a fair read for what I'm seeing so far? Because no real standout performances, consistency in the top 10, but not much better than that up into the top 5. The only thing I've noticed is that, Russell seems a bit more competitive. That's about it.
Yeah, it's a really unusual situation at Mercedes this year. I mean, not unusual insofar as the last 2 years they've had bad starts to the season as well, and they've underperformed from where they should be. But the thing is, this year they're talking about the car actually being in a better place in many respects. A lot of the things that they wanted to address, they have addressed, but then they just have this whole new set of issues. And the whole thing just smacks to me is that they don't fully understand this regulation set. They don't really have their head properly wrapped around it. And that is surprising 3 years into a set of regulations and for a team like Mercedes. And slightly worrying going forward, because the ground effect element of these cars, the fact that so much of the downforce is created underneath the car from the Venturi tunnels under the floor, probably isn't going to change into 2026. It's still going to be a car that's reliant on ground effect aerodynamics, we think, going forward. It's going to be lots of other changes to power unit, potentially active aerodynamics on the car as well. And I'm sure a chance to, level up with the reset. But yeah, my concern is that there's something about their simulation, what their wind tunnel and CFD is telling them, that, and Toto Wolff described this after Sunday. He said it's not so much that the downforce isn't there, because the sensors on the car say the downforce is there. And I thought that was the issue before. But he said it's more just in lap time. So they know they can get the downforce on the car, but it's not translating in lap time. And so I don't know. I mean, that's a whole nother issue. Of course, a Formula One car is not as simple as let's just slam as much downforce as we can onto the car, make it, stick through the corners and it'll be fine. There's so many more interactions going on between suspension, tires, ride, limitations in terms of the ride height. They ran into being disqualified in the US Grand Prix last year. All these other factors going on, but there is something just missing at the moment, just a missing link for Mercedes between what their immense talent back at the factory, engineering talent, is telling them, and also their simulations, and then what is happening physically with the car on track. And to not have that sorted after 3 seasons of this regulations is a point of concern. Having said that, they still finished second last year. I still wouldn't rule them out of kind of challenging a little bit later in the year. I think second's going to be harder this year with Ferrari looking good, but I wouldn't rule them out of leading that pack by the end of it. But yeah, it's just it's a tough situation. Let's go back to you. Oh, no, sorry.
I'm sorry. It feels weird that we're sitting here talking about this. They say that they're more comfortable. It's like we're more comfortable and we're going to finish third in the constructors. That's kind of what this feels like it's going to be, right? Like we're happier with the car and we're third.
Yeah, and that's good in some ways, because the idea with this car was that you had a better fundamental underpinning, a better baseline on which to build. But I think, the concern is that they're not where everything is telling them they should be, and therefore there is this missing link beyond that. So, the car can be better to drive. It undoubtedly is better to drive. Lewis Hamilton was talking about it after Friday practice in Suzuka and said this is the best this car has felt at any point, and actually the best he's felt in a Mercedes for the past 3 years in terms of what the car is doing underneath him. When he puts an input in, it is responding in the right way, but the performance just isn't there. And we've seen that up and down the grid with smaller teams, but with Mercedes, you just don't expect it. That when everything is working on the car, you expect it to be right up at the front. And so far, they haven't been able really to put it in that position. The other interesting thing you picked up earlier, Spence, as well, is that if anyone's going to make that car do the right things and kind of challenge for a podium, it's going to be George Russell at the moment over Lewis Hamilton, which is a surprise to say the least. Anyhow, right, let's go on to, positive notes. Yuki Tsunoda at his home Grand Prix getting a point, and I would say in some style as well, with overtakes through the S's, often on a car on different age tires and so on. But any car overtaken through the S's at Suzuka is particularly special. What did you make of Tsunoda's home weekend?
I love home track weeks, especially with certain drivers who the crowd loves more than others, right? I love Mexico when Checo Perez is doing well, because that crowd goes bananas over him. I love that the Japanese crowd saw a 10th place finish, okay, in the points, but just barely, for Yuki Tsunoda in a clearly inferior car to his superiors at Red Bull, all right? And it didn't matter. Love that. Like, if you want, okay, we're here to help you enjoy the tyranny of Red Bull, okay? Because what we're telling you is you have to put that to the side and you have to find these little races underneath that matter a lot to you, okay? One of my personal ones over the past couple of years, and one which has been very rewarding, a relationship I suggest you enter happily, is to find a driver and sort of live or die with them who's probably in that 8 to 12 range, 8 to 13 range, somebody who is going to get a point and be happy with it and be thrilled, and then is going to later on in their career hopefully go on to bigger and better things. By the way, Red Bull, take a flyer on my man Yuki. Take a flyer. Do it. Make him the number 2 driver. I know we're supposed to discuss logical things and where people can go. And yes, Carlos Sainz is probably a better spot for the number 2 at Red Bull should Checo leave. I don't care. Put Yuki there. Yuki's awesome. Yuki's great. He's funny. He vaulted the security barrier. I don't know if you saw that, but in the pits when he couldn't find his badge, Yuki just decided to clear it like an athlete, like he was a good 6 inches over that bar off of a vertical leap in tennis shoes. So yeah, follow my man Yuki because he gives you great moments like this. Love it.
Yeah, and I don't think we should be saying like Tsunoda, he should be in contention for this Red Bull seat as far as I'm concerned. He's a driver in their junior team who is performing at a particularly high level, is doing everything they ask of him. When he had those radio rants in Bahrain and was a little bit naughty after the checkered flag, he took that on board, and we haven't heard that again this year. Here is a guy who's doing absolutely everything right. Yeah, there is something at Red Bull that, just does not ever seem to entertain the idea of him being promoted. And sadly, from the times that we've, as a journalist press back, have suggested to Christian that perhaps Tsunoda should be considered for that role, it never really goes much beyond that. And it's a concern because I rate him highly on the grid. I put him in my top 10 last year as drivers, mainly because of what he was doing in that car and his success against his various teammates last year. And it doesn't seem that he's really being talked about, anywhere other than staying at RB for another year. And I find that quite uninspiring for a guy who is clearly at the moment, doing a great job in a car which by rights shouldn't be in the top 10, yet he's able to put it in there when other drivers make mistakes. So I hope we see Tsunoda in there, and like you said, to those Japanese fans as well, and the appreciation they had for his 10th place finish. A lot of that comes down to just the understanding of the sport as well, the depth of knowledge and love of Formula One in Japan, because they know how important a 10th place finish is when you're in a team like that. So that was fantastic to see. On the other side of the garage at RB, Daniel Ricciardo, I don't know what to say anymore. I mean, there was pressure already after just 3 races. And then, of course, qualified 11th, just got beat by Tsunoda into the top 10, but had that first lap incident. How did you see it to start with? How did you see that incident with Alex Albon?
It just seemed like a summary of Ricciardo's tenure at RB. We're not here to cap it yet, just, this many races into the season, but that seems like how it's going to go, right? This entire thing seems kind of unintentional and mostly an accident with like largely negative consequences, which I feel like is kind of the move. It seemed weird for RB to bring back Ricciardo. I know everyone loves him. I do too. But in terms of actually doing something with that place, his inconsistent career seems to be meeting an inconsistent end with his performances thus far in the RB. I think it was a racing incident. By the way, great neutral term. Anyone can take into their own lives as a metaphor for things. Sometimes things just go wrong. It's called a racing incident. We're not necessarily going to blame everybody, but it doesn't. I don't want to call it a waste of a spot by putting Ricciardo there. I think that's harsh. I think it is something where you go, we could have done something else with this, and it might have been more productive. Also, part of me just wants to see Ricciardo go ahead, start all the podcasts, begin your little media empire. He's tuned for it. He's great for it. I think he'd be brilliant. Give him a clothing line or an energy drink. Probably an energy drink. Let's be honest. It's going to be an energy drink.
Well, you talk about who, wasted chances and who could potentially be in that seat. The director of the F1 feed showed us exactly who it could be.
Give him an Emmy.
Daniel Ricciardo got
Awards.
back to the garage, and there was
Liam Lawson just right there, right? Liam Lawson just lurking in the back. Somebody who, again, you're talking about Yuki as a driver who you go, man, I rate him highly. I think he deserves chances, right? What has Liam Lawson not done that Red Bull has asked him to do? He's done a lot. He's done everything they've asked him to do. He's been great. That's somebody who I'm always erring on the side of, let's see youth and potential. That would be youth and potential for me, would be Liam Lawson in that seat.
Yeah, I agree. So, I mean, I want to see Ricciardo given a bit more time with the team, and I think it's not really helpful. It is the Red Bull way, but it's not really helpful when you start to get these rumors so early on in the season. One thing to say going forward is that he will get a new chassis in China. It's not because, well, I don't know actually what the crash damage was from that Suzuka one, but this was already decided before the race. But it's more because there were a few concerns he was having, and he wasn't quite sure if there was something within that chassis that just meant that he couldn't quite do stuff that Tsunoda was doing. So there's a new chassis coming in China. Now, that could be very good news if all of a sudden all his problems are answered and he's up there with Tsunoda or ahead of Tsunoda in qualifying in the race. Of course, it puts on even more pressure if the results continue the way they are. And like I said, there's nothing obvious that was wrong with that chassis before the incident in Suzuka. So yeah, it's a bit of potentially extra pressure coming his way, but he did say it was something that he wanted to explore. It's a question he asked to the team. He said, look, is it possible, like we have this other chassis ready now, is it possible to just switch me over for China? So keep an eye on that because I think that could be a very key point in Ricciardo's season in terms of which way this trajectory is going to go, because if he doesn't get it right, he's running out of excuses. Let's finish with one more brilliant result I felt was Charles Leclerc. Qualifying was bad, and there are kind of reasons for that. And it does seem to be on Leclerc's side that he just wasn't getting the tires in the right window for the qualifying lap. But the race was good from 8th to 4th. And I think probably underlining just how good the Ferrari is. But what have you made of Charles? Because here's another driver who, you know, he has his future set, no doubt about it, at Ferrari, but there's a few questions starting to be asked because Carlos is operating on such a high level and people are starting to say, wait a minute, have Ferrari got rid of the wrong driver here going into 25?
Yeah, we're going to be continuing to play that game throughout the season, even if age, potential, and results tell us differently. The early start is that, yes, Sainz looks as good or better than Leclerc. But I think the long term, and I'm always trying to pull out and look long because the pieces are so big in this sport and the processes take so long, you know, to improve a team or for a driver to mature, etc. Leclerc still feels like the right bet for Ferrari long term. It feels like, you know, that him and Hamilton, that's going to be a brilliant pairing for their purposes. However, watching the two of them sort of trade the one spot, which is, I feel like, what they've, you know, kind of done at times this season, right? Like, who is best on the Ferrari side? Watching them do that, I'm going to take it because it's entertainment, right? I'm going to take it because it's also low stakes entertainment because we already know how this race ends, right? We already know how this race ends. I don't have to worry about how this is actually going to affect them. I think they're both going to have good gigs after this season, right? I don't think Sainz is going to end up in the NASCAR Truck Series. I don't think that's going to happen. I think he's probably going to get a Formula One gig. I think it'll be okay. He's going to get a seat and a good one at that. However, I'll take the little drama. I'll take it. This is exciting to me. I get a little frisson of excitement watching teammates compete in a cooperative manner. Okay, do you hear me, Alpine? A cooperative, beneficial manner to both teammates.
Yeah, and I think Leclerc has enough talent that it will shine through later in the season. It seems the changes Ferrari have made, which is why the car is so much better in the race, looking after its tires, has potentially had a knock-on effect on how you get them going over a single lap. And one of Sainz's strengths, especially when he's determined to show everyone just how good he is making sure that he understands exactly what he needs to do and executing it. He is a very intelligent driver on that level. Leclerc often relies a little bit more on his immense talent, and a lot of time, you know, has the car hanging out sideways in all different directions, gathers it up and sets the lap time. But I think it might take him a little bit longer just to get a better understanding of how this Ferrari is treating those 4 bits of rubber surrounding him, which of course are so key to performance. But I think we will get there with both of them. And like I say, it should be a good, exciting battle to watch this year. Okay, before we go, one thing that you're excited about the return of the Chinese Grand Prix off the calendar since 2019, of course, coming back in about a week and a half's time.
I am very excited to see, one, the drivers attacking a track that they haven't looked at in a while. That's always fun, especially through practice and qualifying. You see guys going, turns out I couldn't take that turn at, 160 miles an hour. And sometimes they make some mistakes that are interesting and exciting. We want those mistakes to remain just merely interesting and exciting. I like watching guys hanging out on the limit. You're talking about Leclerc. I'm going to love watching Leclerc at this track because I think he and Max are the two drivers who they take it closest to the envelope. They take it closest to the point of no control. And that's always fascinating for me to watch. I'm also fascinated to watch. We just got off of, I feel like you pass it from one fan base to the next. We just got done with Japan. That's a real hard act to follow. So I want to see if the Chinese crowds are abundant. I want to see if they show up, because I know attendance has been an issue with this. This track is in Shanghai. Okay. I will state this. I live in Atlanta, and we say things are in Atlanta. That might be 50 miles down the road. Okay. Because it sprawls kind of how things work here. And Shanghai is similar. This is not necessarily in Shanghai. So I want to see if they show up. I want to see if fans show up to attend the race. I know that this is a relatively cheap ticket. I know that you can get into this race for something like 60 or 70 bucks. Like, that can happen if you hit the ticket market at the right point in China. So cheap ticket, y'all. Try it.
Well, there have been rumors in the past that seats have been filled by people working in government jobs and so on.
No.
Just to make sure that the TV cameras show the right kind of images. But to give China its due, and one of the things which I think will draw a lot of interest this year is that it's Zhou Guanyu's first home race. Of course, that seems strange because he's been in F1 for a little while now, but he's never actually raced at home during that time. So I think there will be a decent amount of attendance. The other great thing about the Chinese fans is that they go into, I mean, we talked about the support for Yuki, but they go into niche support for certain drivers. And again, like the effort put into be it costumes or props or whatever else to support their drivers, banners is pretty incredible. So yeah, I mean, I think it could be an interesting one to come back to. The other thing, yeah, just going back to what you say about practice sessions and so on, back on a track where this generation of cars have not raced before, is that it's a sprint race. So we only have one practice session, and then we're straight into this slightly changed sprint format where we go into sprint qualifying first, then the sprint race, then qualifying, then the race. But not much time to get used to this track. And what's more, this is a track that's often been known for a bit of subsidence. It's kind of built on a swamp. And so bumps sometimes emerge around the circuit in places where you didn't expect to find a bump. So it's quite possible that the teams get out there with one practice session to nail a setup with basically zero data from these cars, zero data from this type of tire, and potentially a track that isn't quite as they remembered it when they last raced here in a different type of car in 2019. So I agree, there is a huge amount from a competitive point of view to be excited about. And I'm sure there will be a few drivers moaning about it as a result, but actually that's often a good thing, because you know that means that we will get a race that isn't quite as predictable as some of these have been. So Spencer, as always, thank you for joining the pod, and we'll be back to give you a full Chinese Grand Prix preview next week. Cheers.